Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born, and today we are diving into chapter 8 of my book. And this is all about human-centered design and visual agreement. It is one of my favorite chapters to talk about. And at a glance, we're going to talk about just some simple concepts that you can use with your teams as you collaborate, as you communicate, as you make decisions, and ultimately as you guys innovate together. Of course, I'm being joined by my behind-the-scenes partner, Moriah Hidden. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Natalie, and hello, everyone. I am excited for today. I love how meetings actually make a huge impact on innovation, and I'm excited to dive into how that happens. And yeah, so we are going to dive in with our first question. Many leaders view meetings as a necessary part of work, but you argue that they can be a powerful driver of innovation. Why do meetings matter more than leaders actually realize?
Yeah, one thing I say in the book is that meeting culture is your innovation culture, and you can kind of tell the culture of the organization by how they do meetings. And so, I think about a story that I tell in the book where a leader asked me to just come in and observe some of his meetings, and I don't know how they did it for so long, but just sitting in the meeting with them, I was frustrated because um, no one really had a role in the meeting. So they came in, they talked for hours. I mean, it was like a 3 hour meeting. And then we left, and it wasn't really clear who owned what. There was no one to keep time, so they went over on almost every topic they talked about. There was no one really assigned to facilitate the meeting. There was no one assigned to take notes. And so, since no one really understood their role in the meeting, you had people that were checking their email, they were checked out. People were not really dialed in and engaged. And fun fact, when you do the stats on meetings, you see that so many people do other things during meetings. So the study's a little old, but I love this study because in 2018, Salary.com did a little bit of a survey on this, and they looked at the fact that at least 36 million meetings wasted about 37 billion in lost productivity because what are people doing in meetings? They are daydreaming, 91% of the time. They are doing work that has nothing to do with the meeting they're in, 73% of the time. They are overwhelmed by meetings that they're attending about 45% of the time. It said, and this is shocking, 39% of people are sleeping during meetings. Now, I don't know if they're on Zoom or they're in person, but I think that sleeping during a meeting is pretty intense. And
Right.
then about 31% of people are doing emails and texts. I think that number is probably a lot higher. But when we look at that, we realize if you have that many people in your meeting and half or more are checked out, you probably didn't put together a good meeting or the right meeting, or you don't have the right people in the meeting in the first place.
I think that's so good. And what I was thinking about is like the intentionality behind all of it. And you can't just be like, okay, guys, we're going to meet at 3 and just lecture everyone. And I know we're going to dive into different ways of how to make meetings more interactive and engaging, but just intentionality of having those different roles of a time taker and a note taker and making sure that people are engaged. So I think that's awesome. And I think meetings can be so beneficial, is the word I'm looking for, in order to have great innovation. After the meeting, many teams have productive conversations, but struggle to create momentum afterwards. How can leaders structure meetings and follow-up processes in a way that drives both engagement and execution?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about what doesn't work, right? We talked about the worst meetings, and that's a fun question I love to ask people when I'm doing a session on how to have better meetings is what's the worst meeting you've ever been in? And we kind of talked about some of those factors, but if we're going to create really good meetings, I think we have to start by assigning people roles, right? So people need to know why they're in the room. We even need to tell them, hey, I invited you to this meeting because I'd like you to contribute the following. I think coming into a meeting knowing what I'm there to contribute helps me to actually show up and be more effective in that meeting. The other thing that I think is really important in meetings is that we actually create visual agreement. So we got to work visually. Let's think about this for a second. Have you ever come to a meeting and about 30 minutes in the meeting, somebody comes in that wasn't a part of the earlier meeting because they were late or whatever, and now you're having to backtrack And
Mhm.
you're sitting there thinking, I've already seen this movie. I don't want to see it again. Well,
Right.
a lot of what visual agreement and visual thinking does is it allows them to catch up visually without us having to backtrack. So when we think visually and when we create visually, whether that is through whiteboarding or through mural, which is online, or any other of those ways, it allows people to visually catch themselves up without us having to say, let's go back in time and tell everyone what we talked about. And so, not only does writing or drawing help us to be able to create more of this visual agreement, but it actually helps us to be able to catch people up as they're coming in. The last thing that I think is really important is that whenever we have a meeting, there needs to be a core objective for why it exists. I worked at an organization that said if someone sends you a meeting request without a agenda, you don't have to accept it. Man, did that
Mm.
change the way our culture
Yeah.
was, where every time you sent out a meeting, you actually had an agenda attached? That was a game changer because now we knew that our CEO was telling us if this meeting comes without an agenda, you don't have to show up. You don't even have to accept the meeting. Now it's forcing everyone to think through the meeting before they actually plan it. So, really, when we come into the meeting, it's asking questions like, are we trying to clarify decisions? Are we trying to get opinions? We need to decide who owns the action items, and we need to ensure that we send those action items out after the fact so that people can actually grab those pieces and run with them. And so, as the host of a meeting, we want to have goals. We want to know why we're setting the meeting up in the first place. We want to make sure we're time boxing all of our topics. We want to make sure we work visually, and we also want to make sure we're driving any key steps or next steps forward so that people who come to our meeting actually feel like their time is being spent well, not wasted.
Yeah, that's good. Again, just the intentionality behind that. And I love your visual agreement and all those aspects that it comes. I don't think people realize, like, oh, if we're just drawing some notes on the whiteboard, it actually can make a really big difference, not only for the people in the meeting, but also for the people that come in late or have another meeting. Um, Speaking about visual agreement, that is a key element and a key theme that you talk about in this chapter. Why do you believe that organizations underestimate the power of getting ideas out of people's heads and onto a board where everyone can see them?
Yeah, I think people don't use visual agreement as much because, and you hear people say this all the time. Well, I'm not like a drawer. I don't draw. And so as a result, we don't really use visual agreement. Well, even a poorly drawn picture is sometimes better than nothing. And so there's an illustration that I use in the book where three people are staring at an idea and they're saying, I'm glad we all agree. But it's not until they all put them down on the board that they realize one person is visualizing a circle, one's visualizing a square, one's visualizing a triangle. And it beautifully depicts the fact that oftentimes that is how we think we're agreeing. We're all have a version of what we think we're building, and each person sees it differently. And then we go off and build it, and we're all upset when we're discombobulated and we're not on the same page when we come back together. And a lot of times it's because we did not visually agree. And so what the illustration shows is that they're able to actually go through a few iterations together to actually get to what we actually agree on. And that's the beauty of visual agreement is it's a way that we can get there faster. As a matter of fact, I love this quote, and I kind of opened the book with this section where it says that the human brain can process images up to 60,000 times faster than text.
Um,
So, for example, when we see something, we immediately can see what that is, and we know, and our brain applies that faster than we can read it. So, the beauty of that is, even if you don't know how to draw, the visual agreement helps us get there faster.
That's awesome. Today in our world, we have Zoom meetings out the wazoo. And so, what would you say is like a good way to do it over Zoom meetings practically?
Yeah, so I personally love Mural. I got to work with Mural in 2020, and it was just a really cool thing to get to see inside their organization and the way that they really live out what they believe around visual agreement. But to me, that's an online whiteboard. People can jump in together, they can put sticky notes up there. There's something powerful that happens when I'm in a meeting and someone writes something down that I said or that you said. It's like you're like, okay, we've got that. And
Mm.
sometimes when you're saying something and no one's writing it down, you're like, is anyone really hearing me? Are they understanding me? Does it make sense? Once it's written down, your brain understands that it's captured and it can move on to the next thought. So it actually, from an innovation standpoint, when we visually agree, it helps us to even move faster in the conversation. Oftentimes, when you find people are repeating themselves over and over again, it's because they don't feel like they're being heard. And when we
Mm.
show visual agreement, it's our way of saying, I've got your idea, I've captured it. Go ahead and give me the next idea. And so that's why I love using Mural if we're on Zoom, because we can still get good things done, and we can still visually agree, even if we're not in the same room together.
Yeah, that's good. I think it comes back to psychological safety as well. And I think meetings are not just there, like we mentioned, just to lecture and tell the team just your idea, but it's for questions and conversations. And hey, what are you thinking? Let's write that on the whiteboard. Or that's not what I got. This is what I interpreted, and just different
Mhm.
things like that. So I think that's also really important. I know in the book you mentioned a process called open, explore, and close. How does that process help teams move from endless discussion to actual innovation and decision making?
Yeah, so let's think about the course of an hour-long meeting, for example. A lot of times what happens is, we may get in there, throw out a bunch of ideas, nobody's writing them down. Some of the ideas might not be the best idea, so they're just getting shot down in the moment. And then depending on how we shoot those down, that person may not share another idea. And that really does, and it can stifle creativity, it can stifle innovation. So, the way that I like to guide people through the open, explore, close model is that basically you have a section of the meeting where you're just collaborating, and the idea is no balloon popping. So, for those people who like to immediately respond and shut ideas down, we have to ask them to wait. We have to ask them to allow the good and the bad ideas to surface, because it's only through moving those bad ideas out of the way that we can actually get to good ideas. And so we actually have to ask them to with refrain from selecting what's good and bad in their mind, which can be really hard for some people. So that's just open, like get as many ideas out as you can. And then from there, we want to explore. So what that means is, hey, so and so, this is a great idea. Can you tell me more about what that would look like to you? Or so and so, let's talk about this idea. I'm not sure I understand. Can you tell me more about what you were thinking? And then we're like, hey, these ideas actually seem really similar. Maybe they should be grouped together. So when we explore, not only are we asking for more information on those ideas, we're expanding kind of the aperture of what's inside of those ideas, but then we're also grouping like ideas together. And my favorite part of the meeting is then close, which is once we've done all of that, ideating and exploring, we actually close it down. So what happens then in the closing section is this is where we actually get to the place where we're going to discuss and narrow. Once we've narrowed, we're going to decide. Now, decision could look like a couple of things. It could look like us walking away and saying, this is what we're doing. Glad we all agree. Let's go execute. But it also may look like us choosing the top three ideas, taking those away and agreeing to do more research on them. So a lot of people
Mhm.
get afraid of this framework because they're like, oh my gosh, what if we just decide in the meeting and it's not right, or we need more research or data? That's fine. You can actually narrow it to less ideas. You can go do that research, even break people up into groups and have them do that research and come back the next time and present that back. So there's a number of different ways to close out, but the importance is to let people know that we're driving towards a key decision. There's nothing worse than getting in a meeting, talking a lot, and then you don't even know how the story ended, right? So close allows us to tell them what the next steps are, even if it's we're going to narrow it down, do a little bit more research, and then decide.
I love just the whole aspect of that framework because it is intentional throughout the entire process, and people actually have like a idea of what they're getting themselves into, but they also have their roles and they have the way that they know what they're going to do when they get into the meeting. And they also know that it's not just going to be a meeting just on the clock, but it'll be a productive meeting, and being able to walk away with some stuff is really good and really important because now you have those people that are actually going to pay attention and you guys might actually get to a goal and a shared vision. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and
I
one thing I'll
know.
say, yeah, I was just going to add one more thing to that, which is really
Oh,
important
go
because
ahead.
some people think like, well, why would I waste an hour doing that when I already know what I want to do? A lot of people say
Mhm.
that, which to me, a lot of what you're doing through that as well is you're teaching people to work together. You're teaching them to, rapidly generate ideas, and you're teaching them how to pitch their ideas for clarity. And to me, that's how you create people that can innovate is we're teaching them the tools that we want them to use in order to work with other people. So I just want to mention that because there's a power in this method, it's not just let's do the method. There's actually a benefit of each person kind of developing themselves that you get as a result of doing it this way.
Another thing that I just remembered is like your framework, you illustrated it in your book of how it looks. And you kind of gave the example of just using sticky notes. So a lot of people come into a meeting and instead of just throwing out ideas, it comes back to that visual agreement. And you can write all these ideas on a sticky note. You can then group them. So you're actually looking at your ideas on a post-it note or a sticky note and being able to actually see the framework and see it come through. You're not losing ideas in the process, and it's not just spoken out and nowhere to be found again kind of thing. So you mentioned that it's more important when you do write it down and people feel more validated. So I
Yeah.
think sticky notes is a great way to do that. Um, I know I have been in multiple meetings where I'm like, this could have just been an email. And I know that a lot of people joke about that in different things, but many leaders do struggle to know when something should be handled through an email versus a meeting. What practical advice would you give leaders who feel trapped in meeting overload?
Yeah. So I love that premise. Like, hey, this could have, should have been an email. And I think there's a few ways that we can know if it could have or should have been an email. One, if we are just delivering like a one-way conversation and we don't want any feedback, we don't want any additional ideation, we're not even going to open the floor for it. Guess what? It's probably an email if it's just a one-way communication. Okay, let's think about this for a second. You need to get information out really quick, and maybe it's an emergency or there's a speed that's needed. That can also be an email. If the decision has already been made, that is probably an email. If there's not a ton of room for, potential discussion or questions or options, or if the issue is really simple and non-complex, that could also be an email. And I think these are important because we should really only trigger meetings when there's a need for collaboration or, maybe there's important stakeholders that need to be a part of the discussion or decision. If the direction we want to go in is unclear and we need to generate ideas or options, if the issue's complex and there's like maybe there's several moving parts and several teams that need to be a part of that discussion, several stakeholders, that could be a good reason for a meeting. If we're creating something new or something that's changing something really critical in our company, we need a meeting for that. Training, education, transformation, change that's taking place in the organization, or a vast need for visual agreement. These are all good reasons for meetings, but unfortunately, sometimes we get it a little twisted. And I've also read emails that should have been a meeting. So I think it can go both ways. Not only are we in meetings that should be emails, but sometimes we're reading an email and we're like, oh my goodness, this should be a meeting. Like, why are we just sending this out over email? This is a massive change and we're not even talking through it. So I think we've got to look at it through both of those lenses.
That's good. Even the chapter is just human centered and just like realizing that meetings should be more discussion based and feedback based and gift based and feedback is gift based. And so, yeah, I think that's a good reminder. So, near the end of the chapter, you talk about developing a bench of innovators rather than relying on one idea person. How can leaders create an environment where innovation becomes everyone's responsibility?
Yeah, so this is to me some of the tools in the book, and especially this chapter, really help us to get each and every person outside of their comfort zone and how they think about things like visual agreement and leading meetings and going through that open, explore, close process. And so to me, one of the most powerful things we can do is invest in our people. And sometimes when we think about investing in our people, we think about sending them to a training class or sending them to some kind of course, or getting a certificate. But there's a very simple way in the day-to-day work that we do where we can invest in them by having them lead one of these meetings or having them, lead a portion of the meeting or pitch an idea where we're constantly not only pushing them outside of their comfort zone, but we're also giving them the tools to be pushed outside their comfort zone. So we want our team, I think everybody wants this if you lead a company, you want your people to show up like owners, not like renters. And so in order to do that, we need to give them the tools that they need in order to innovate, but we also have to give them the opportunities to innovate. So we have to help them to use some of these frameworks, feel comfortable using them, feel uncomfortable using them, but to get kind of in the water and to use these different opportunities that are available to them. So for us, What does that look like? It means a lot of us need to change our meeting culture. We need to change the way that we meet. We need to change the format of how we meet. And we need to make sure that when we have a meeting, that those people in the room are not wasting millions or billions of dollars, right? Because, the meeting's too long or it's too boring or there's no visual agreement or we're not actually engaging people. And as a result, people are multitasking. Well, that's the kind of meeting that is a waste. And so, how do we engage people, get them involved in the meeting, get them collaborating and contributing? Those are the types of meetings that we want to have. Those are the types of meetings we want to be a part of.
I think what you just said kind of wraps up a lot of what we've just talked about throughout the book. It comes to empowerment and these processes and the framework. But if we don't have everyone doing their own part, then it falls very quickly. And if we don't have a safe environment to do our own part, innovation also falls. And so I think that was just a great encouragement that doesn't have to be perfect. It can also fail. It might take a couple meetings to really figure out a game plan and a success meeting. But I think it is encouraging for all leaders out there to know that it doesn't have to be perfect, but just being able to create that safe environment and create the safe collaboration and discussion and taking little steps, I think also is huge and will become huge later on. So
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to create some guardrails for your meetings. One of the things I love to say is one conversation at a time. How many times have you been in a meeting where everyone's talking over each other?
Right.
So if you have guardrails for meetings, you just point to the guardrails. You don't have to say so and so, stop talking over so and so. You say, hey guys, let's not forget our guardrails. Let's go back to one conversation at a time. How do I make sure we can all hear each other? There's a notorious person that I've worked with that always starts a side conversation during a meeting. And it's like bringing us back together to say, hey, so and so, let's get back with the rest of the group and make sure that either you might have something that everyone needs to hear, but if they don't need to hear it, now is probably not the time to say it. So this meeting culture helps us just to have those rules of the road. So I hope people will take this in and kind of think about how to adjust their own meeting culture so that they can be successful.
Yes, that's awesome. And realizing that meetings actually can help with innovation and they're not just something that you do at work. This was great today. Natalie, is there anything else that you would like to share for our listeners?
No, just want to share where to find and follow Innovation Meets Leadership on all the social platforms. And you can head over to innovationmeetsleadership.com for more information. Head over to setitonfire.co where you can pick up the book that we're talking about. And we've got 2 chapters left, which I can't wait to dive into. Thanks for your time today, Moriah.
Yes, of course.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership. And visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.